Why should you let your favorite employee leave your team?
You should let your favorite employee leave your team because
Internal mobility is like a really hot topic right now at organizations, and the reason why is because many many organizations are not able to hire right now just because they're being told to do more with less,
yeah,
but also because there's not a lot of external opportunities. Many employees aren't quitting, right? And so what that does is that leads a crunch. If organizations are going to see any kind of productivity gains outside of just the AI realm, I'll just put AI to the side for a second. They're going to have to make their organizations more palatable to having internal mobility and opportunities and those types of things. So, how did you get into researching this in the first place? And it sounds like it might have been the Johnson & Johnson thing, but what is the whole map approach to internal mobility as well?
yeah. So I really got into this. Yeah, it's kind of a funny story.
Well, I wanted to come back to, you mentioned the Center for Advanced HR Studies at Cornell. I mean, my understanding, I love these kind of closed door groups. Big fan of them. Had multiple of them on in the past. I actually have a few other ones coming up in the future. But can you tell us a little bit about that? And what is it for? Who's involved? That kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So our Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies has been around for
Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, J.R. Keller, Associate Professor, Faculty Director of the Executive Master of Human Resource Management program at Cornell. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics, workforce planning, talent intelligence, behavioral science, and understand the impacts of AI in the workplace. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, where you can read Cole's articles or watch the video of the podcast. You can also see video on Spotify or YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. Feel free to check out Cole's new book, People Analytics, and everything else that's going on at colenapper.com. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. I love the little C. That's nice.
Thanks.
Well, let me just start us out with the easy question. Why should you let your favorite employee leave your team?
You should let your favorite employee leave your team because you're going to have a line of amazing employees waiting to knock down your door to take their place.
And how do you know that?
That's a good, fair question. I know this because it is the result of probably the favorite study that I have ever worked on. Partnered with a insurance company, a health insurance company, looked at their personnel records over almost a decade, and looked at every single internal job posting in the organization. And then was also able to look, because we had their whole personnel records, at which managers were more effective or more open to letting their employees leave. So actually, like, truly helping them advance their careers in the organization. So not just having them continue to work for them, but giving them a slightly better title or a slightly big pay bump, but figuring out a way to get them a promotion to work somewhere else for somebody else in the organization. And it turns out managers who did that got twice as many internal applications. More importantly, right, because you don't want to be overwhelmed by a bunch of sort of average or subpar applications, they got more than twice as many applications from top performers in the organization. So the folks the organization's considered stars. Plus lots of interest from other functions and units in the organization. So they had broad exposure to a whole bunch of awesome candidates that to backfill that position. And that this effect lasted even when the manager moved to other roles. And so they developed this reputation as sort of a talent exporter. And so they always had a line of people that wanted to work for them, which I think is super cool.
Absolutely. Well, what I got pulled up on my screen is, I believe, the research article that that covers this. So from the Academy of Management Journal, you got it published in 2023 called "Advance Them or to Attract Them: How Promotions Influence Applications and Internal Talent Markets." And I think used that same research to publish something in MIT Sloan Management Review as well called "Why You Should Let Your Favorite Employee Move to Another Team," with you and Catherine DeLugos. Is that how you pronounce it?
You got it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll just note, Cole, that somebody should only read that MIT Sloan Management Review article. It's the 1,200 word summary of the 60 word academic paper, but you get everything you need out of that much shorter version.
Well, I will say don't put down our audience. I would say if there's any practitioners out there that actually would be capable of reading AOM, it would be our audience. So don't sell them short of that. But well, how did you like? One of the things I like to do if I ever have an academic on the podcast, there's essentially two rules. One is you had to have done some research that actually used real data in the real world, which kudos to you. Excellent work there. And I want to dig more into it in a second. But second is you have to be willing to deal with my complaints about academia. So we'll get into that later. But JR, you come highly recommended. Previous guests of the podcast, Dr. Sekou Burmese at UNC, and also Dr. Ethan Burris at University of Texas. Both, I know, friends of yours recommended you, and even some serendipitously, I happened to talk to some of your prior students who are also both huge fans of yours. So wanted to call that out as well. I'm not going to name them on the podcast because they haven't been a guest before, but thought that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
But tell us so what is your role at Cornell, and what's some of the cool stuff you got going on there? And then we'll get back to the research in just a second.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I have been at Cornell for just over 10 years. So I finished my first semester, my 11th year in December. I do a couple different things. My favorite thing to do is to teach our amazing students. I teach our Cornell ILR, it's the Industrial and Labor Relations School undergrads, sort of their intro to the world of work and what topics, trends, and technologies shaping the field of HR, and hopefully getting some of the skeptics to convert that this is a really cool and interesting career path for them. But one of the really cool things that I've been able to do over the last couple of years is I took over as the faculty director for our Executive Masters in Human Resource Management program. And it's very different from teaching the undergrad. So this is a 15-month Executive Masters program where folks spend 3 weeks on campus, do the rest asynchronously. They get a Cornell degree, and it's focused for mid to senior level HR folks who really want to be a CHRO in the future. And talking and teaching and learning from those people is really the highlight of my year.
So, I mean, what's it like teaching the next generation of HR leaders? That's a big responsibility. What do you feel any pressure? What's that like?
Listen, I feel every time I walk into, especially this room of more senior people, I have to remember that there is actually some stuff that I know that they might not know. But that there is so much stuff that they know that I don't know. And those class sessions are so fun for me because they really are, they're much more of a conversation and a dialogue. Think of the coolest panel discussion or audience Q&A that you've been a part of at any sort of PSYOP conference or something else. It's the best version of those for a week straight. So I learn as much from them as they learn from me.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that you invited me to speak to that program in December.
Yeah.
You texted me afterwards. You said it was the best presentation. I'm not making this up. The best presentation on people analytics you've ever seen. And I was like, is this the first presentation on people analytics you've ever seen?
It was.
It was also the worst then.
No, it was amazing, right? It was as everybody, I assume who's been listening to you, it was the distillation of the coolest core concepts from your book too. And I got countless emails right afterwards and then have done since. So I really appreciate you coming to join me for that.
Yeah. I got spammed by a lot of your students. Absolutely. So that definitely happened. But I hear, I've heard Cornell is in Ithaca, New York, and it's actually a really beautiful area. What's it like? I'm assuming it's terrible this time of year, but what's it like up there?
I'm looking out right now to the snow that's slowly melting into slush out here. Ithaca is this hidden gem of a city in an area. So we are, anytime I travel, people ask where we're from. I don't know why I made the mistake of spending New Year's in Canada, where it was like negative 16
Whew.
degrees. Um,
So you went from bad to worse in
but it was
terms of
up
weather.
in Quebec City, which is actually Ithaca's pretty. That was the most gorgeous city I've ever been in. Um, but it is we're right in the heart of they say Ithaca is gorgeous because we have all these natural gorges and waterfalls,
Mhm.
these amazing hiking trails. And if you like, you know, if you like alcohol like I do, we have amazing breweries and wineries. This really is like the heart of the Northeast wine region. If you like red wines, not the best. If you like Rieslings and sweet wines, like this is the place to spend a week in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Well, you were a finance guy though. So how did you end up in HR in the first place?
So, it's really interesting because my finance career, I think, is what set the stage for everything that I study now. Out of college, I was a finance major. Numbers were always super easy for me, and so I kind of, in some ways, was not super thoughtful and just took kind of the path of least resistance to major in what I thought I could get the highest GPA in. But I was smart enough. I got some great advice from our career center that if I didn't know exactly what I want to do, I should try to find a great company that's known for developing people. And so I went to work at Johnson and Johnson in their financial leadership development program. It's a slightly different version of the program that they still run now, but a 2-year program, rotated you 3 times over 24 months, like paid for your moving expenses. So you like moved locations, moved businesses. The time that I was in that program, I mean, I had like a corporate card before I had an ID badge. And I met, I think, every single CFO of all the 160 Johnson and Johnson operating companies. But what really stuck with me is that my peers, and I started with, I think it was around 70 finance and accounting majors. By the time the program ended, there were only 35 of us left. And I'll just tell you this story that stuck with me is our very last training. So it was about 8 weeks before we sort of graduated from the program. We were about ready to go to lunch, and I was sitting next to a friend of mine, and she said, I'm going to law school. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's amazing. Fantastic. And then I came back from lunch and she never showed up. So she was like, I'm going to law
Yeah.
school.
No,
And
she meant I'm going right now.
that I am going right
I'm
now.
leaving.
We'll never forget that. But what really got me interested in people was like, does this make sense for the company to be spending all this money on the 70 of us if half the people are going to leave? Why are people joining this program if it's not really what they want to do, or are they using the resources of the company to then propel themselves in their other career? It
Yes.
took me 8, you're totally right. And it took me 8 years to kind of figure out that these are questions that like I could actually study and give advice to and help answer. And so it was really kind of those first 2 years in that development program that shaped my entire really academic trajectory.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's a really good segue back into the research. So I don't know if you know this or not. I'm assuming you do. Internal mobility is like a really hot topic right now at organizations, and the reason why is because many many organizations are not able to hire right now just because they're being told to do more with less,
Yeah.
but also because there's not a lot of external opportunities. Many employees aren't quitting, right? And so what that does is that leads a crunch. If organizations are going to see any kind of productivity gains outside of just the AI realm, I'll just put AI to the side for a second. They're going to have to make their organizations more palatable to having internal mobility and opportunities and those types of things. So how did you get into researching this in the first place? And it sounds like it might have been the Johnson & Johnson thing. But what is the whole map approach to internal mobility as well?
Yeah. So, I really got into this. It's kind of a funny story. When I was preparing to do my dissertation, what I actually had really wanted to study, at least what I thought I wanted to study, was how executive recruiters shape the labor market for sort of non-CEOs. So what's the role that they
Oh,
play? And
that's interesting.
do they actually make better decisions than sort of company recruiters would make if you had your own in-house function?
Yeah.
And
And that's the kind of thing that could get published in AOM as well. So that makes sense.
totally. But what ended up happening was this company, I wish I could tell you what it was, but I'm still under I think like a lifetime NDA. The same health insurance company where I did some of the research we talked about earlier. I got on the phone with the new head of talent acquisition. And I said, listen, I'm really interested in studying executive recruiters and when you use them and are they effective? And he said, he just started. He's like, within 3 months, I'm cutting all of our executive recruiters. We're doing it all in house. I think it's a huge waste of money. And I
Ooh.
was like, that doesn't feel like a good research opportunity. And I just asked him, like, well, what else is going on that we could talk about? And like, I think most HR folks, like, there were so many questions and so many opportunities and so many projects he wanted to explore that didn't have the manpower to do it. Is that I ended up going to their headquarters, spending a week talking with their whole internal development talent acquisition team, and realized, I think, right now, 15 years ago, what a lot of companies are talking about now, which is, we'd rather make the best use of our internal talent than spending so much trying to recruit externally. So it was a little bit of, I was directed by, I think, what was going on at the time.
Yeah. Well, tell me about like what does it take from a systems point of view for organizations to do internal mobility effectively, and what it like how do you get managers on board? I feel like the manager is the key unlock in this situation. Anybody who's worked internally knows that there's actually a set of perverse incentives for a manager. If somebody's doing really well, they are likely not going to want to get rid of that person to promote that person's career, because their own career might be at stake by losing their best performer. So can you talk about that at all, and what does that look like in your research?
Yeah, so cool. I think you've nailed it. And it took me a while to get to the point that you got to. I think probably much quicker. Was, you can, as an organization, right? There's sort of building blocks for an internal talent market, right? To have internal
Hmm.
mobility happen. And so now there's all sorts of technology that enables you to do that, right? You can buy a million off the shelf systems. Almost any HRIS system allows for internal posting. And so there's the one piece where you have to sort of have the supply and demand, right? And it's really easy to know kind of what's in it for the organization, right? It's amazing, right? It helps lower recruiting costs. You fill jobs quicker. You retain people. You transfer knowledge within the organization, and it's also super clear. Like, it's really great for employees, right? Because they can build a career, develop new skills, have new experiences, but all under the stability of working for the same organization. They see other people move, they're motivated to stick around. But as you pinpointed, and what I've recently come to this point is like, none of that works if managers aren't on board, right?
Yeah.
Because, this
What's in
idea,
it for them? Like what is in it for the manager?
well, and that's I think really it can be really hard to make that sell, right? Because you're basically saying, like, you're telling managers a couple of things. You're saying number one is you need to be open and actually sort of proactively helping your best employees move out of your team, right? And like you said earlier, there's not a lot of incentives to do that. Most companies don't have financial incentives. Companies will, you can correct me if you've heard differently. At least my sense from talking with companies is they'll often have, like, on a manager sort of annual review, there's like a business performance piece and a people
Hmm.
leadership piece. But the thing that really gets rewarded is the business leadership piece, right? That's really what drives the needle. And so if you're like awesome at business, but maybe don't treat your people so well, you're going to get farther ahead than if you're amazing with your people, but your business performance is so so. And so I think getting managers to buy into that is hard. Um, and then there's this question of, like, there's all these relationships that employees have to think about navigating, right? So, like, if I'm working for Cole, right, and he's been like, maybe he's been really good to me, so I'm reluctant to tell him I want to move on, or maybe you're kind of a jerk, and so I don't know about asking you for permission and how you're going to react. And so even if we have all these jobs posted and people that want to do them, like, do managers basically encourage or allow employees to do this? And so I think a big part is, you know, really ideally, both from sort of a mindset perspective and from an incentive perspective, sort of letting managers know that there is a benefit to them, right, to participating in
Yeah.
these markets.
Well, I know you've done like a project on that before of like how to convince managers if you love someone, you have to let them go kind of thing. And being able to deal with things like internal rejection as well. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, so a big part is a little bit of what we talked about at the top, which is the research showing that managers who let their people go, right, who really
Hmm.
actively participate, right, the number one reason when Catherine and I did interviews across the world about managers, they weren't holding on to people. They weren't really holding on to them because they're selfish or bad people, but they were like, well, I would let them go if I knew I had somebody good behind them, right? If I knew I had a replacement. And so it's basically, what am I going to do without them? And so my hope is that part of like some of this empirical work, right, that we were talking about is showing that managers who do let people go are always going to have a line of qualified people that want to work for them. Helps to let managers know what's in it for you. Well, you're going to have a great set of people, and you're always going to have a great set of people. So you're much better positioned. You're going to have a great reputation, and that's going to follow you throughout your career in the
Yeah.
organization.
And then what are internal talent markets or in like these marketplaces and how do they play a role?
So these internal talent markets can take a couple of different forms. Some people have called them, I call them internal talent markets. I think that's the most apt description. Some people call them opportunity marketplaces. I've heard
Hmm.
that term used occasionally. But basically, the idea is that you're kind of mimicking the external market. So there is full visibility to all the opportunities available inside the organization. The way that I tend to study this is in terms of full-time jobs that are open, but you
Yeah.
might also have, some companies have experimented with gigs or projects or sort of part-time roles. And then there's the supply side, which is making sure that employees are then aware of those opportunities and are encouraged to pursue those that meet their needs and interests. And I think part of the challenge that I see that arises, and I was just talking with the company about this morning, is thinking about what the purpose of these markets is. So on the one hand,
Hmm.
it seems pretty obvious that it's to get the right people in the right jobs at the right time.
Yeah.
But you can imagine there's one focus where it's kind of the get stuff done is the sort of PC way of putting it, part of the
Well,
market.
is there another way of saying that?
There's a shorter four-letter version of that, and what that does is if you have a market that's really about like getting stuff done, then, and especially if you're using some of these new AI sort of matching technologies that like look at people's skills and match them to roles, that can be a really great way to move people in the organization where work needs to get done. But what it doesn't do is really help with skill development, right? Because you're basically
Hmm.
moving people with expertise into other roles where they're just going to use that same expertise. A more developmental approach to thinking about a market is part of the reason we open up these jobs and have employees look for them is they know what they're interested in, where they need to develop. But then we need managers to say, I'm willing to actually pick people who are maybe an 80% match and not a
Yeah.
100% match because we want to develop them.
Well, look, I think one of the fundamental challenges of internal mobility, more generally speaking, but of these marketplaces specifically as well, is it assumes that there's like an omniscient third party optimizer that is going to just move people around like chess pieces on a chessboard
Yeah.
to put them in the most ideal of locations. And from everything I've ever seen firsthand in organizations, like that does not exist. And so how do you reconcile those two things that there's like the ideal optimized route mathematically perhaps with
Yeah.
you based on all the right criteria versus kind of the political realities on the ground of how real internal talent moves and how do you square those two things?
Yeah, that's a super great question. I have a colleague, Bo Calgill at Columbia, that's kind of looked at some of these
Hmm.
different versions of these markets, and he's found these sort of mixed results on sort of which of these sort of the sort of chess master version versus employee led versus manager led. And I think my sense from my work is that these markets work best when they actually just look like open markets and people are like it's part of it is finding information, right? And so
Yeah.
you're not always going to have, so there's the I did a study a number of years ago called Post. It was about posting and slotting. And so what I did was I compared, so this is in another organization, compared matches that happened when managers posted a job on an open market and
Mm-hmm.
let people compete versus where managers thought they had a sense of who the best candidate was. And so they just sort of tapped them on the shoulder and slotted them
Yeah, I was
into the
always
role.
tapping on the shoulder was always something that drove me nuts about
Yeah.
internal mobility.
And so I talked with managers and they were like, listen, there's no reason for me to post this job if I know who is going to be a good fit. Right. So they weren't trying to in the most cases, they weren't trying just to help a friend, but they thought they were making a good decision. But the data showed that when managers posted this job and opened it up to competition, the employees they selected performed better, stuck around longer, were much less likely to be fired or voluntary turnover, and were more likely to be promoted. They were also more likely to be paid more because they engaged in some negotiation, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so
it sounds like organizations are probably against that then.
well, it was a little bit like, imagine this, like you tap me on the shoulder and give me a promotion and say, I'm going to give you a 10% raise. Like, I don't want to burn any goodwill by saying, I really want a 15% raise. But if I know that you made me compete, I can get my true value. And I think on the margins,
doesn't pay off for the organization.
But on the margins, right, having better matches and happier employees probably overcomes that. And so, I think so I am in favor of this. I think this market on the whole will help sort people into the right roles. And partly because as a chess master approach, right, for an organization, like you're looking at like employee profiles or talent cards or things that might not actually perfectly reflect sort of hidden skills or the interest of employees and where they might actually, like, you have to trust that they have a sense. But I think you asked about something earlier that I didn't answer yet, which is, so I went and I kind of was preaching the gospel to our, we have this Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies here at Cornell, where we have a bunch of companies that pay a membership fee and we talk with them all the time and try to give them insights. And so I was going around preaching the gospel of internal talent markets, open it up. And I started realizing that there was this one big pushback, which was, they're like, listen, dude, thanks for telling us this. But like, what you're basically, the thing you haven't recognized is that you are telling us to have our employees apply for jobs and most of them aren't going to get them. Right. And so if on average 10 internal candidates apply for a job, we're hiring one. So 90% of our internal candidates are going to get rejected.
And they're all going to quit afterwards.
And so that's what they're worried about. They're all going to quit afterwards. And I was like, oh yeah, we should probably look at this a little bit. Right. So so is there a better way to handle, because I think in some ways rejection is an inevitable part of a career. Right. And so, but how can organizations handle this a little bit better? And it was really fun because we had a company that was like, we'll study that with you because we're really interested in looking at this. And what we found, what I thought was really interesting was, listen, the candidates who got rejected were much more likely to leave than the candidates who got hired. Obviously. But among the rejected internal candidates, they were much more likely to stick around if they actually got an interview with the hiring manager. It didn't have to be a final round interview, but they actually had a conversation. And if they got
a debrief.
And because what I thought was really interesting was one, they sort of felt like they'd be treated. It was part of this was this sort of fairness, procedural fairness.
It's a procedural justice. Yeah,
exactly. But the other part was informational, which is, look, like, I wanted this job, but now I know what I actually have to do to get it in the future. So I feel, so it's like you can think of applying for a job inside as a learning process and not necessarily just a zero-sum game. And so it was also the fact that when internal folks are much more likely to stick around when they lost to another internal candidate versus an external candidate. So really part of this was, the big message was, if you're going to hire externally, and there are lots of good reasons to hire externally, is if you have a candidate that you don't like, good internal candidate that you didn't want to leave, like you really have to sit down and have a candid conversation with them about why they didn't get that job and what's next.
Well, I think what's the debrief is key. So, if you're applying externally, I think nobody likes it, but everybody kind of expects it to be a black hole that, if you don't get the job, you just never hear anything back and it's atrocious, but everybody's kind of used to it. But internally, you at least expect a shot, i.e., getting a chance to talk to the hiring manager. And B, in the best cases, you get told, like, hey, you're a part of the trust tree here. You're a part of the family. Here's where you need to improve here. And actually, I can even work with your manager to give you some of those kind of skills or opportunities that might get you from point A to point B at the next level. And so actually being kind of treated like you're a part, like they're invested in your career is really crucial to make those kind of things happen. But if you're internal and you get treated like a black box or, a black hole, like
Yeah.
absolutely, like this company doesn't even value me and I work here.
You're preaching the gospel on that. You're totally right. And I think that's why I think these sort of more free open markets are really useful, because in
Yeah.
part they facilitate conversations that might not have happened otherwise.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to come back to, you mentioned the Center for Advanced HR Studies at Cornell. I mean, my understanding, I love these kind of closed door groups. Big fan of them. Had multiple of them on in the past. I actually have a few other ones coming up in the future. But can you tell us a little bit about that? And what is it for? Who's involved? That kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So our Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies has been around for, I think, over 20 years now, and I would tell you, it is the number one. It's the reason that I came to Cornell, um, because it provides us with the most amazing connection to CHROs and decision leaders at, right now, 45 companies across the world. Right, most of them are primarily U.S. based, but some with global
Mm.
operations, and to really understand the challenges around talent acquisition, compensation, analytics. And it helps in two big ways. It helps me in two big ways. It helps me to inform what I'm going to research, so that I can be asking questions that are actually going to be useful, right, to practitioners, and not just, right, something that only Sekou and Ethan Burris are going to read and nobody else, right? I'd like you to actually sort of read, you and others to read some of my stuff. So it helps, I think, to ask interesting questions. It also, you were talking about like how we teach and train the future generation of HR leaders. It's really hard to do that if you don't actually know what's going on in organizations and the issues that they're struggling with and the trends that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And it also provides an avenue, right, for them to learn from each other and to learn from us, right, on sort of what's going on, what we know from the academic space, and how that helps translates to organizations.
Yeah.
And so it is, just like you said, it's a convening group. I think one of the really cool things that my colleague Brad Bell has initiated is we focused a lot of time recently on the business partner role and the future of the business partner
Mhm.
role in organizations, and how central that has become, and how challenging of a role that is, because you basically have to know every aspect of HR, but you have to work with managers and understand the business and the politics around working with them, but then you also have to understand the COEs and the politics there and how to
Yeah.
manage that, and really thinking about developing sort of a training series around how to be an awesome business partner. And that's one of the things we offer to our members.
Well, and we talked about this. I'm launching a data driven HR academy just for this reason, because AI has made it even harder. And it's like that role is going to become kind of the catch all for a lot of things that are non transactional, non standardized, that AI is going to kind of consume over time. And so they're going to have to be kind of these GMs of HR even more so than they are today. So I think that's a really incredible point. I know you worked with Peter Capelli, I believe,
Yes.
earlier in your career, and I wanted to give you credit for doing highly applicable research. Peter, obviously a titan of
Yeah.
doing that type of research as well. What's some of the stuff that you did with him? But also, like, why are academics not more like you guys? Like, why? And is it changing? Like, is it getting better or is it getting worse?
So let me start with the first one. Working with Peter has been really the highlight. The reason that I did a PhD. I mean, this is going to sound like it's not true, but I swear to
Hmm.
God, I worked at Johnson Finance, and then I worked as a career counselor at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. So because I
Yeah,
was like, oh, maybe I can understand
that's a
careers from
top
this
school too.
perspective.
That's a really great school.
Awesome school. And I read this book called Talent on Demand. Peter's book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is what I want to do with my career. And then I was able, I got into Wharton and was able to study with him, which is kind of like never happens.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is, Peter is, I would say he is the smartest, clearest writer and clearest thinker that I have ever met. We wrote a paper as the first set of things that we worked on were trying to understand all the different types of alternative work arrangements that organizations use. Right? So
Mm-hmm. Which
contractors,
are that's also a hot topic right now too.
super hot topic. But Peter was on this 17 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like we were thinking about this and Peter was thinking about it and brought me on to think about it. And we wrote this, it's an academy management review paper. And these types of papers tend to take like months to develop. And Peter doesn't have months. We wrote this paper in 6 weeks because like planning, thinking, how to express it, like just like being around somebody like that and realizing the importance of the way Peter would always say it is you don't write a sentence that your 85-year-old grandmother can't understand.
Yeah.
Right? You're not trying to be smarter. And the other thing that he said is, you're going to spend most of your career, if you do this right, you're going to talk to practitioners, you're going to understand what's going on, and then you're going to prove it and help answer some of those questions with data. And I think that as higher education, right, the practicality of I don't know if, I think people would say it's under attack. I don't know if it's total. I think as people question where they want to spend their money, like where the government should invest and where families and individuals should spend their tuition dollars, I think we're going to have to be more and more applied. And so I think that like all the market forces are going to lead, hopefully, people to be doing more of this type of work.
Should and will are different though. Will they actually do it? Like will the next generation of professors be more like you, or like what are you seeing? I mean, you're on the inside. I just hear it anecdotally. So what are you seeing?
Here's my concern. So
Come on, say what you want to say. Like,
no, I don't think we have enough people.
I
don't think we have enough people that actually understand what's really going on in organizations. That's when I do peer review of other papers. I'm like, what you just described in the hiring process is not what actually happens. And so how can you build a theoretical model around, I don't know, a blog post that I feel like you read on hiring? And I think, so that's
welcome to my world.
and then I think the other piece is like, so this job, at least the way that it is now, like it has become, you have to be a good writer. But I think more and more there's this like insane amount of value placed on empirics to the extent that like you have to know. I mean, I read these papers with methods that I'm like, I have to like educate myself before I can comment on them. And I think in some cases, we're leaning so much toward this quantitative, everything has to be perfect, that the people that have those skills are not necessarily the people that organizations are really equipped, right, to have conversations like this that we're having.
I see it as like in academic circles, I see the debate going as this. It is, we have had too much proliferation of theory. So because there's too many theories and you can't get published on theory papers, now you got to go to quant. And so you've got to go in all of the, Cambrian explosion of quantitative methods, and like how when they're misdiagnosing the problem, it's not that there was too much proliferation of theory, it was the lack of applicability of the data that was where the field was going wrong. And therefore they're just trying to figure whatever way they can like get their foot in the door to get published and have like a series of papers and get tenure and all of that stuff, rather than, going and addressing the real problem, which is no one's ever going to use their sophisticated methods to tackle a real business problem. So therefore you've already invalidated the whole premise of the research at face value. And so why don't we actually go tackle something the way that you've been doing it? And so I want to give you kudos for the 10th time that you're doing that, but I just don't see why more academics don't see that.
I don't know. I think part of it is I think the main reason is that it's part of it's the training and part of it's personality. But I think part of it also is like, there is this, you have to build relationships with companies so that they trust you and want to share
Yeah.
data, and you have to understand companies' concerns. And I
Yep.
think the other thing is you have to be able to, like, when I was working on the posting and slotting paper that I was telling you about,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, that paper took me 3 years from like when I first got the data to publish. If I would have told the company, like, I'll give you some results in 3 years, it's a totally new leadership team anyway, let alone different
Yeah.
problems. And so I was able to understand, like, what skills do I have so I can help tackle some problems right away for you. And then I can spend my evenings, right, writing Stata code and doing these
Yeah.
sophisticated analysis that you don't need, right?
Oh yeah. Like let's say that again, just to translate it for you for the people out there that might be listening who might want to be interested in partnering with you or someone like you is in 3 weeks instead of 3 years, you'll get some pivot tables with the actual results that you can go action, right?
Yes.
And you'll get it for free or free-ish, depending on what the kind of arrangements that you have. And then 3 years later, you'll get a bunch of publicity because JR went out and published something amazing, and you get the kudos from that. But it's a win-win for both parties as long as that both parties hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, and it's not just, first of all, I'm going to clip that because I love that sales pitch. And for me, it's always free, right? Because the
Yeah.
data and my ability to kind of play around with that data, it is so much more valuable than any check that you could write.
Yeah. So just trying to do a little public service announcement there. Hopefully that was helpful.
That was
Um,
awesome.
yeah. Well, do you want to join me in Cole's Corner?
I'd love to.
Awesome. Welcome to Cole's Corner. Well, so we established earlier that you started out in finance. You kind of went into HR. But if you weren't in HR or finance, what would you have done with your career?
Oh man, what I don't think anybody would have hired me for this, but I would love to be the GM of a college football team. Like this stuff
Right
going
now?
on in the oh, I love it. This stuff
That
that's
sounds
going
like
on
the
in
worst job right
the oh,
now.
but it's so exciting, right? It's all about mobility, right? How do you attract people? How do you hold on to the people? Like, but it's,
Oh, man.
I mean, it's more complicated than it's ever been, right? I just saw the Washington quarterback like signed a contract and then went in the portal 4 days
2 days
later. But I
later.
think, like, thinking about how to build a roster, retain a roster, how much do you want to spend? Like, I mean, that's like would be a 24 hour, 7 days a week passion project.
I bet you, I don't know if Cornell has a football team, but I bet you they'd let you do it because they're not in major college football like these other schools.
Maybe I should. Maybe I should. I park right next to the right next to the coach's office. So maybe I'll strike up that conversation next week.
Yeah. All right. Next thing I got for you is what's the place you've never been to that you most like to go and why?
I would, I've never been to the Middle East. Um, I see all this vibrant stuff that's happening in Dubai and Arab Emirates and all these areas. Plus, my family's Lebanese and Syrian. Like that's my whole mom's side of the family. Um, and I see like all my colleagues doing all this executive education and all this cool stuff and learning about what's going on. Never been, would love to do that.
That would be, yeah. I mean, it's a booming part of the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Love that. If you were a character in any book, TV show, or movie, who would you be and why?
Hmm. Okay, so that's gonna such a nerd. But I would love to be. I'm also like I would love to be the detective in any one of these Harlan Coben adaptations on Netflix. So I don't know if you watch any of these sort of
I don't know what that is.
trashiest
So
limited
explain
series.
what it is.
It's like it's like there was this current one that just came out, Runaway. There's a daughter that ran away from college and maybe is on drugs, maybe isn't on drugs. The father's trying to find her, but maybe he killed the boyfriend. There's like 8 different things going on, and there's this one cop that's trying to tie all the threads together. And I just think it's fascinating. So I would be a TV detective. Does that count?
Yeah, that's like the internal mobility of being a cop right
Yeah,
there.
I know.
It's an optimization problem.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, I got one big question for you, which is knowing that the top HR leaders, and I mean this because I've seen it in practice, the top HR leaders come through programs like yours, if not yours. A lot of them come from your program. Knowing that they're coming through your program, what things do you make sure to teach them that set them apart from other HR people or even other HR programs?
Like two big things. They're the cornerstone, especially of both our master's program and our executive master's program, are a focus on business strategy and understanding the business. I mean, that is
Mm.
where we spend the majority of our time. That's where we spend the beginning of their time. And we don't talk about anything that doesn't link back to the business. And ideally, if I have time to ask you a question, I have a question kind of around the business case piece. And the other piece is really on influence, right?
Yeah.
So much, especially right in the sort of GM of HR roles and the top level. It's how you tell how you engage in storytelling, how you influence. So less like how you do HR, like how you do talent acquisition, but how you are an effective HR leader.
Yeah. But first of all, well, kudos to you again, because I agree with that violently. Second of all, it's so depressing that that's a differentiator.
I guess that is true, but I think it
Yeah.
is really a true differentiator.
I mean, it makes sense why you like the book so much, because that's exactly what I hit on in the book is, focus on the strategy and focus on how to make outcomes with that strategy. And then also the training academy I'm launching. But I wish that weren't a differentiator for
I
you,
know.
because it seems like it's such a low bar for HR programs to pass. Yeah.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, so I've done all this work on like hiring decisions and mobility, right?
Yeah.
And look at outcomes. And so, for example, right in the posting and slotting paper, right, I find that managers who post the those matches result in higher performance, lower turnover, more promotions,
Yeah.
all things that um, should right, result in
Yeah.
better organizational outcomes, right? Should have some sort of an ROI, right? But you have to
Hmm.
build out the market, invest in it. But I have never really been able to solve this riddle of like how to think about return on investment in some of these right
Yeah.
initiatives that you might do. And I'm curious if you have any insights on how to do that, or at least how to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I have things I've learned from some of the titans, just like you. So, we've had previous guests like Alexis Fink, who was on investing in people with Wayne Cascio and John Boudreau. We've had John Boudreau and Peter Ramstad on the podcast, who have done tons of work in this space as well. And I always think that like the core basis of it is like SDY, and utility analysis and all that. There's tons of ways of doing that. I'm too dumb for all of it. And so but one of the benefits of which academics don't have, but internal people analytics practitioners, that they've developed a core infrastructure and linked it with other business systems. Like, you understand the P&L of different parts of the business and you can link that with your people data. Again, that takes time and effort. Not every people analytics team has that, but when you do, it makes some of these things really easy for a simple guy like me, which is I'll use an example that you used from earlier of you went into an organization and they were talking about getting rid of all their executive recruiters.
Yeah,
I'm like, cool. This looks exactly like what a natural experiment looks like. And so we can see, okay, it like what happened when we had executive recruiters in house, and kind of like the cost associated with it, but also the impacts on the organization. And I can actually see like, do they bring in a higher quality of talent, and does that higher talent, affect the P&L of their, the profitability of the business units that they're leading because they're executive recruiters, and I have that data. And I can see, we bring in, Corn Ferry or Hydrick and Struggles or whoever is doing the headhunting for those top leaders, and how much extra is that costing the
yeah,
organization, because chances are it's pretty expensive. And second of all, what happens to the quality of talent, and then what happened, and like it's just really basic stuff like that, and looking at it in terms of natural experiments. And usually another thing that academics don't have lots of times, but internal people analytics practitioners do have, is just what I would call imperfect control groups, right?
okay,
And so you can see parts of the organization that did nothing, and you can compare them to parts of the organization that did something. A control group. It's not a true random assignment,
yeah,
but it's as good as you're going to get internally. And so you can do those type of things, and it makes it pretty easy to see if something has an impact. And lo and behold, lots of times it does, and oftentimes lots of times it doesn't. And so separating the signal from the noise in that capacity makes a big difference. But if you have your internal systems in place, it makes it much easier to quantify the dollars and cents impact of your work.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, it helps. If anybody out there is listening that has a company that has that linked, wants to look at stuff,
They do.
call me up.
And reach out to JR. I'll say it for you. Like if you want free labor, if you want to do cutting edge work, you want to be a part of great organizations like the Center for Advanced HR Studies, partner with, like, a lot of people just don't know that this is accessible to
That's
them,
yeah.
right? And so I mean, we really are doing a public service telling them that you can do these things. And again, in 3 weeks you can have your problem answered, and in 3 years you can get a cool publication in MIT Sloan Review, or Harvard Business Review or whatever, and get a bunch of kudos that way. So yeah, I love kind of sharing that model with the world. You ready to do some What Am I Reading?
Okay.
All right. Let's I want to give kudos to somebody else.
Okay.
I'm unabashedly going to say this. My favorite new Substack writer is Tyler Weeks. He's been crushing it. He's published like 5 or 6 Substack articles on people analytics, and he is just crushing it. So Tyler, if you're out there listening, I'm a big fan of what you're doing. One of his latest articles is called "Prediction is a Property of Scale." And so for somebody who came from kind of an IOSI background, it's so impressive when somebody who doesn't have that background comes in and describes what you do. And they oftentimes describe it better and more concisely and more simply, more Peter Capelli style than you could do yourself. And so what Tyler does here is he talks about the problem with psychometric assessments and the correlation coefficients, and how that actually, it can make a big difference for organizations if you have the scale associated, but with also what are the shortcomings. And so I actually wanted to focus primarily, he does a really great job. Go read the whole article, but on this one chart that shows the relationship of an assessment score, standardized and standard deviations, as well as its relationship to job performance with a 0.2 correlation and what that looks like in practice. And again, one of the standard practices is you create some kind of cut score. It looks like it's about a little bit above 1 standard deviation.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, well, actually, with a 0.2 correlation, there's a lot of, let's call them false positives, but also a lot of false negatives here.
Yeah.
Right. And he goes in and talks about, how that really shows that if you have the mean differential, it's like less than a third of a standard deviation that you're actually doing. But if you have tens of thousands of people going through this, 4% of the job variance, which is the R squared associated with it, is actually quite a substantial uplift for the organization. Two things I wanted to call out here before I turn it over to you. I'm assuming you had a chance to read this, JR. Yeah. Is ways I have not heard people describe this in typical practice. If you look at this scatter plot, you see that the lowest actual job performance of a person who did get selected is about negative 2.5 standard deviations. And that's about a little bit more than a half of a standard deviation above the lowest performance of a person who did not pass the assessment. And in my mind, that's the lift, right? Is what you're saying is you're essentially getting rid of anybody who's 2.5 standard deviations and below. That's the entirety of the lift, because anybody who does work internally knows it's not necessarily the top end all the time that really is giving you all the performance. It's the mitigation of the bottom end. And so that's one way of looking at it. But another, and this is, it's going to relate to the second article that we're going to cover here in a second, is this artifact. And I know this is probably made up data. Actually, the highest performer on the on job performance actually would have not gotten selected, right?
Yeah.
And so you can see that it is still imperfect. And so I want to come back to that in a second, because they drew this line vertically. I would actually like to do more research if they drew the line horizontally and just focused on what was being assessed that would have gotten you 2 standard deviations above the mean of job performance. And if you just hone the assessment on that rather than the looking at this kind of correlation here, because I don't know why people don't do that more, but really what you're looking to do is to restrict the range to just high performance and only studying there. And many assessments do not do that. And so I'm going to pause there. I've been talking too much, but Jared, what did you think about this article, and what do you think about any of the provocative statements I was just making?
So I thought the article was awesome, so
It's
clear,
really good.
and so interesting in light of the fact that where companies spend a lot of the money on assessments is actually sort of for smaller populations, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we want to help develop our leader. Like we're spending a lot of money on a small population of our
Well, there
employees.
are high volume hiring
That-
assessments for call centers,
That's
distribution
true.
centers where you get thousands of people who come through them.
So I think that, right, you have both of those. I think it is really interesting. I think I love the point that you made at the bottom of the distribution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that so often and like I think we'll talk about like there's such a focus on stars, right? And getting the
We're going to talk
stars
about it in a
that
second.
we minimize like picking like not hiring the pilot who's going to crash the plane is really good, right? And so being
Yeah.
able to like really sort of sort out people who are going to crash and burn and maybe crash and burn the organization, super valuable. And I don't think we never really, I certainly not as academics really talk about assessments in that way. We're always like, how do we get top performers? How do we get high job performance? But not how do we eliminate people who we shouldn't even, right, who we know would be
Yeah.
terrible or likely to be really terrible in a job.
That gets to one of my points, and I'm going to bring it up again here in a second, is you always think about type 1, type 2 error. And so assessments typically over-index to false negative or false positives, right? So people who got selected who shouldn't have. When my biggest concern has always been false negatives, people who didn't get selected but would have been amazing. And why don't we optimize more to false negatives than we do? I think that that's actually a pretty good segue, though, to the second article that we've got. um, Rob Briner is really good at surfacing some really captivating stuff in terms of evidence based HR. But this is a recent article from Ernest O'Boyle and Martin Goetz called "Rethinking Stardom: A Relativistic Approach to Studying the Absolute Best Performers." And so Ernest O'Boyle and Herman Guinness
Yeah.
famously published the Power Law findings, which kind of turned a lot of performance on its head, which is saying that essentially like a small number of high performers really account for an absurd amount, like a disproportionate amount of impact on organizations, and that performance is not normally distributed. It follows more of the Power Law. What's interesting about this is the publisher of that, Ernest O'Boyle, is actually kind of taking the other side of this of
Yeah.
rethinking stardom, and how Rob Briner in his LinkedIn post talking about this quotes Oscar Wilde saying, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." And then, so folks are starting to question this, looking at stars in the workplace and what's going on here. But I want to give you a chance. What did you think about this one, and especially in relation to the article that we just covered from Tyler Weeks?
Well, I think this was fascinating. You know, the Guinness and O'Boyle work on the Power Law is one of the
Mm-hmm.
few academic papers I assign my undergrads to
Yeah.
read, and they're like, "Oh my god, I had no idea about this." And so I think it's super eye opening, and I think this is where certainly, like this
We've
really,
covered it on the podcast probably 20 times.
yeah,
I cornered Herman Guinness at a conference and tried to
really.
get him to come on here. He keeps blowing me off. But
Okay,
yeah, like I've like sent out the news to the world. If Herman Guinness are going to talk to me, maybe I'll approach Ernest O'Boyle next
there
to
you
get
go.
him to come
He's
on here.
great.
But like I've wanted to talk to him about it for years.
And I think this idea, it was really provocative. I had not seen this article yet, so I was like, "Oh, this is on my read." So it's on my full article reading list. I haven't
Yeah.
read the whole thing yet, but this idea that we have to think about, like, can we just call somebody a star? We have to think about them relative, like how we're going to
Yeah.
think about how we perceive them. Um, like it really just, I don't know that I have any super insightful reactions other than, like,
Yeah.
I think this is something that both as an academic field and as practitioners, we have to think about, right? And really what we're thinking about when we think about star performers, like, is it, I think part of this is like, is it an objective metric
Yeah.
or is it just a relative metric and how we should think about that?
Well, if you know, um, it's a true power law, right? And again, this article brings into question: is it truly a power law all the time? Is it not? If it's truly a power law, your top performing person accounts for something like 25% of the performance of the entire company,
It's unreal.
right? and your top 10% of people account for 80% or so, almost 80%. So if it's truly a power law, which brings me back to the point I was making about in the last article of like, again, I know it was like a made up scatter plot.
Yeah.
You had the one dot that was the highest performer. So it was above 3 standard deviations, highest job performance in the company, and they were deselected. That's criminal for an organization to allow like a false negative like that to occur, because you are potentially sacrificing, again, you know, disproportionate amount of impact on your organization by excluding even 1, 2, 3 top performers via some kind of a selection or assessment. So I just think it's fascinating that it's obviously really important to chop off the bottom end of low performance,
Yeah.
but it is equally, if not more important, to take into consideration the high end of performance, which I do not think we have good measures of right now, frankly. And most organizations do not pay enough attention to it, regardless of whether, you know, we need to rethink stardom altogether. High performance is still underutilized at most organizations.
Yeah, I think so. I'm hoping that this relates because I think about this a lot. There's this famous article that I know that I'm sure you've seen, but this like this whole idea of workforce differentiation, like the A
Mhm.
players versus A positions, right? And
Yeah.
really thinking about what these
And we've
roles
had
are.
Mark Huslet on the
Yeah,
podcast to
and
talk
so
about it.
that is the I will never. I mean, that is the to me that is the best HBR article that I've ever read. It's hard for me to think about. I assign it every year to every group I teach because I think it's just amazing. But I think empirically too, it's like this is where I think like, do we actually have a good way to quantify or actually sort of empirically or just with some level of rigor identify what these eight like what positions are that we have to really have a star performer and which ones like can we not screw it up, right? And then think
Yeah.
really carefully about the types of assessments that we use. And if we really want to worry about weeding out the bottom performers or having the high performers. And I think so many companies talk about workforce differentiation and really have this as an idea, but I don't know how many are really great at sort of executing
Yeah. I
that.
think a lot of companies think about it theoretically. And imagine this, like this is not tough to think about theoretically, but very few companies. I will give tech companies credit because I actually do think, like in the AI race, they do think about things in these terms. And previously in the FANG companies also kind of fit this methodology, but many companies don't. Which is, if you think about it, like, okay, you've got your A roles, your critical roles for an organization, and they matter to for strategy execution. They're the only thing that matters, right? There's
Yeah.
everything else is just supporting roles essentially at a certain point. And what if there's only, and you know that there's star performers, and so there's probably something like 10 or 15 people in the entire world that do this job, that, you know, that are differentially better than everyone else. Why don't you go hire all 15,
Ugh.
right?
Yeah.
Because
Huh.
yeah, it might cost you an absurd amount of money, but it's probably a drop in the bucket compared to your total revenue if you're a large organization. And what it does, it's not just that it makes you that much better, it's that your competitors don't have them.
Yeah. That's
And
really
if your competitors don't have them, you will, again, if it's for these kind of critical roles, it doesn't have to be for every role,
Hmm.
but for these critical roles, you will destroy the competition.
I've never thought about the competition, like
Yeah.
stealing the talent or keeping it away, playing keep away a little bit. I never thought about that angle before.
I mean, that's where the whole concept of things like acquihires came in like the tech sector, is like they'll just find like, hey, this little startup happens to have like 7 of the top 10 people in the world. We'll
Yeah.
just pay $200 million and get rid of the software, and we'll keep these 7 people on our payroll, and then nobody else has them. It's like a game of keep away, you know, and it's just stuff like that happens a lot there. But I don't understand why more industries don't employ those kind of the logical extension of the strategic thinking that comes in the talent place marketplace of ideas. But let's hit you. Sorry, we belabored the point here too much, but I wanted to hit you with the last LinkedIn article, kind
Yeah.
of going methods heavy today. I'm realizing, but
I'm
hey,
into
you're
it.
an academic. This you love this stuff. This is from Suki Wang, LinkedIn post. She's a data scientist at Roblox. It says averages lie and medians conceal cliffs. And I was like, I don't even need to read any more of this post. I love it already because it's people are always looking for, if it's surveys, things like percent favorable or averages. And if you get really a sophisticated person, they'll know, well, averages are sometimes skewed. We should look at the median. And I'm like, okay, you're already at the 95th percentile and you're still wrong.
Yeah.
And so what she does is she goes, again, one of the shortest but best posts I've seen on promoting survival analysis and hazard curves and Kaplan-Meier, risk mitigation. It's used in biostatisticians, but also pretty frequently in people analytics teams for things like modeling employee turnover. But one of the things that she shows in this post is just a simple Kaplan-Meier curve of people quitting on a 4-year vesting cliff or no cliff of vesting at an organization, and you can see and they have this almost identical median or means and medians, but substantial differences if you look at the Kaplan-Meier curves of, you see this huge cliff of people quitting right after the vesting cliff, and you see this very smooth curve of quitting if there's no vesting cliff. And after the cliff, they're almost identical in terms of their level of quitting and the level, I guess, the people who've stayed versus those who've been casualties according to this hazard model.
Yeah.
But what did you think about this one? Do you love this kind of analysis as well, JR?
I love it. I almost exclusively, when I look at things like promotions, like time to promotion, right, things like that, always use the survival analysis. I took a 2-day survival analysis boot camp when I was in my PhD program, and it was all on like using car crash data.
Depressing.
So it's always like the teaching cases are always around people dying, right? It's called survival analysis, or cancer, whatever it might be. I think it is. We talk a lot, and you talk a lot, right, in your book and other places around, right, using data to tell a really clear story.
Yeah.
And I think a survival analysis curve is really easy to do that. And I think the hidden piece of this is it sounds complicated, but they're super easy to run, right? It's not like a super complicated statistical model to do that.
I love it. I mean, the funny thing about it is you can actually build these kind of things in Excel. You don't even need advanced statistical software. And it's not a formal curve, but it's good enough. It's directionally correct, you might say. And these type of things, if you can just look at proportionality of a particular thing over a series of time and calculate that, you can do that in Microsoft Excel very, very easily. And so I don't know why it's not employed more, but love that they're doing this type of work. But Jerry, you've been a fantastic guest today. Anything you want to promote or how people can find you before we wrap this up?
You can find me. I have a website at Cornell, but I'm also on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with people, see everything that people are doing, be able to follow your work. So connect with me there to keep up. And I try to post updates with everything that's going on with the school and all the programs that I'm a part of. So thanks.
People are going to hit you up after this. Yeah, for sure. But I know you're a fan of the podcast. You've been listening for a while, so I hope this doesn't hurt your feelings, but I do have a quick PSA to announce, and we'll cover it more in the next time we have a Cole and Scott. But Scott has officially stepped away from the podcast. We're going to do Cole and Scott episodes like once every 2 months-ish, so he'll still be around for those, but I'm officially flying solo. This is the first episode of 2026, so I wanted to call that out that I'm recording, but I know you've been a fan, so just want a huge thank you to Scott for what we've done through this period of time, but wanted to make a quick PSA there. I don't know anything you want to say about that, JR, because you've been listening for a while.
I've been listening for a while. It's one of the few podcasts where I actually listen to every single episode. I think Scott's awesome. I'm super glad that you're keeping this going, because people should be listening to this. It's a must listen.
Well, Scott, if you're out there listening, I really appreciate you, buddy. But with that, I wanted to wrap this up. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics Podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, JR Keller. Thanks for joining us, JR.
Thanks for having me.